In the rolling hills of Holmes County, Ohio, during the autumn of 1995, 42-year-old Amish farmer Jacob Yoder faces the greatest test of his faith and courage. When a massive wild stallion known throughout the county as Devil's Shadow kills a man during a livestock auction, Jacob makes a decision that horrifies his community. He buys the horse. The locals warn him. The English veterinarians refuse to treat the animal. Even his own family begs him to reconsider. The coal-black stallion has trampled 2 men, destroyed 3 barns, and earned a reputation as the most dangerous horse in Ohio. Animal control wants him destroyed. Every horse trainer in 3 counties has given up, but Jacob sees something in the horse's eyes, a pain that mirrors his own. 3 years ago, Jacob's 12-year-old son Samuel died in a farming accident. The boy had been Jacob's pride, his legacy, the future of their family farm. Since that terrible day, Jacob has been going through the motions of life. His heart is frozen as the winter ground. His wife, Rachel, grieves in silence. His 15-year-old daughter, Sarah, has withdrawn into her, and his youngest, 8-year-old Daniel, desperately tries to fill the void his brother left behind. When Jacob brings Devil's Shadow home, he doesn't tell his family the real reason. He can't explain that when he looked into the horse's terrified, angry eyes, he saw himself a creature so wounded by loss that violence became the only language left. What follows is a journey of redemption, danger, and ultimately healing. As Jacob works with the impossible horse, he begins to understand that some things cannot be broken, only transformed by love. But when a crisis forces him to make an unbearable choice, Jacob must decide what he's truly willing to sacrifice for a second chance at hope. This is a story about the healing power of forgiveness, the courage to trust again, and the unbreakable bonds that connect broken souls. Set against the backdrop of Amish country, where faith and family are everything, one man's desperate attempt to save a dangerous horse becomes a path to saving himself and his family from a grief that threatens to destroy them all. The October wind carried the smell of hay and manure across the Kidron livestock auction grounds, mixing with the scent of rain that threatened but hadn't yet fallen. Jacob Yoder stood at the edge of the crowd, his calloused hands gripping the top rail of the fence, his broad-brimmed black hat casting shadows across a face weathered by 42 years of Ohio sun and 3 years of unspoken grief. "Jacob, you shouldn't be here." He didn't turn to look at his neighbor, Isaac Miller, didn't acknowledge the concern in the older man's voice. Instead, his blue eyes that once sparkled with joy, but now held only the flat gray of winter sky, remained fixed on the commotion in the auction ring. "That beast killed Martin Hostetler," Isaac continued, moving closer. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, though the chaos ahead would have drowned out a shout. "Kicked him in the chest. Dead before he hit the ground. The English police, they want to put him down. You know this." Jacob's jaw tightened. He knew, everyone in Holmes County knew. Martin Hostetler, a dealer known for his way with difficult horses, had made the mistake of entering Devil's Shadow's pen 2 weeks ago. The funeral had been last Thursday. In the ring, 6 men struggled with ropes attached to a massive black stallion. The horse reared again, his hooves cutting through the air like scythes, his scream of rage echoing across the auction grounds. He was magnificent in his fury, 17 hands of pure muscle and wild terror, his coat so dark it seemed to absorb the light, his eyes rolling white with panic and anger. "They're going to shoot him right here if nobody takes him," someone in the crowd muttered. "County Animal Control's already approved it." "Good riddance," another voice replied. "That devil's been nothing but trouble since Tom Brennan brought him down from Columbus. Wild as they come. Can't even get close enough to check if he's sick or just mean." Jacob's hands tightened on the fence rail until his knuckles went white. The wood creaked under the pressure. "Jacob," Isaac's hand landed on his shoulder. "Don't do something foolish. Think of Rachel. Think of Sarah and Daniel. They've lost enough. They've lost enough." The words cut deeper than Isaac could know. because that was exactly what Jacob was thinking about. He was always thinking about it. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days ago, his son Samuel had climbed into the grain silo, the one Jacob had told him 100 times to stay away from. The boy had wanted to help, wanted to be useful, wanted to make his father proud. Jacob had found him buried under thousands of pounds of corn, 12 years old and already gone. The funeral had been proper. The community had gathered, prayed, and sung hymns and laid Samuel to rest in the cemetery beside the white church on the hill. Everyone said it was God's will. Everyone said time would heal. Everyone said life goes on. But they were wrong. Life didn't go on. It just continued. Like a wheel turning without purpose, like a clock ticking in an empty room. Jacob went through the motions, plowing the fields, tending the horses, sitting at the dinner table, but he felt nothing. Not joy, not sadness, not even anger anymore. Just a vast, empty nothing that seemed to grow larger with each passing day. Rachel had tried to reach him at first. His wife of 18 years had held him at night, had whispered prayers, had begged him to talk to her. But how could he explain that he was drowning in an ocean of silence? That every time he looked at Daniel, he saw Samuel? That every time Sarah set the table, he counted 4 plates when there should be 5? After a while, Rachel had stopped trying. She poured her grief into her quilting, her cooking, her Bible. Sarah had withdrawn to her room, spending hours writing in journals she kept hidden under her bed. And Daniel, 8-year-old Daniel, tried so hard to be good, to be helpful, to be enough. But he wasn't Samuel. None of them was Samuel. And Jacob knew, God help him, he knew that his family was breaking apart, piece by piece, and he couldn't seem to care enough to stop it. In the ring, the stallion broke free. The crowd gasped and scattered as the rope slipped from one handler's grip. The horse wheeled, his rear hooves lashing out, missing a man's head by inches. Someone screamed. Someone else shouted for the sheriff. Get the gun. The auctioneer yelled, his amplified voice cracking with panic. Get it now before someone else gets killed. Jacob moved before he could think. His legs carried him forward, his boots kicking up dust as he ducked through the fence rails. Behind him, Isaac shouted his name. Other voices joined in, warnings, curses, prayers. But Jacob didn't stop. The stallion saw him coming. The horse's head swung around, ears pinned flat against his skull, teeth bared, his eyes wild and white-rimmed, locked onto Jacob's. For a moment everything stopped. The crowd fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Jacob stopped 10 feet from the horse, close enough to smell the sweat and fear rolling off the animal's coat, close enough to see the scars, rope burns on his neck, whip marks on his flanks, and something else, something in those eyes that looked almost human. Pain, not the physical kind, though Jacob had no doubt the horse had known plenty of that. No, this was deeper. This was the kind of pain that came from being broken in ways that never healed. The kind of pain that turned to rage because rage was easier than despair. The kind of pain Jacob saw in his own mirror every morning. Jacob Yoder, you step back right now. The sheriff's voice boomed across the ring. That animal's dangerous. Jacob didn't move, didn't break eye contact with the horse. The stallion's nostrils flared, his muscles bunched, ready to strike. One kick, and Jacob would join Martin Hustetler in the cemetery. One bite, and he'd bleed out before the ambulance could arrive from Millersburg. Easy, Jacob whispered, his voice so low only the horse could hear. Easy now. The stallion's ear twitched. Just one. Just for a second. I know, Jacob continued, taking one small step forward. I know what it's like to hurt so bad you want to make the whole world hurt with you. I know what it's like when everyone's scared of you, when they look at you and only see something dangerous, something broken. Another step. The horse's head lowered slightly. Not submission. Jacob could tell this animal had never truly submitted to anything but curiosity, confusion. Maybe just exhaustion from fighting for so long. I know what it's like to be so angry you can't remember what it felt like to be anything else. Jacob's voice cracked. I know what it's like to want to destroy everything because you've already lost the only thing that mattered. He was close enough now to reach out and touch the stallion's nose, close enough to see his own reflection in those dark, tormented eyes, close enough to smell death on the animal's breath. They want to kill you, Jacob whispered. And maybe you want them. Maybe you're tired of fighting, tired of being afraid, tired of being alone. The stallion's breathing slowed. His muscles trembled but didn't strike. So am I, Jacob said, and realized with a start that he was crying. Tears ran down his weathered cheeks and into his beard, the first tears he'd shed since they'd lowered Samuel into the ground. So am I. Slowly, carefully, Jacob reached out his hand. The crowd held its breath. Somewhere, a gun clicked as the safety was released. The stallion's nose touched Jacob's palm. It lasted only a second, just the briefest contact, warm and soft and trembling with uncertainty. Then the horse jerked back, snorting, but he didn't run, just stood there, sides heaving, watching Jacob with eyes that seemed to hold a question. Neither of them could answer. Jacob turned to face the auctioneer, who stood frozen on his platform, microphone dangling from his hand. I'll take him, Jacob said. His voice carried across the silent auction grounds, clear and steady despite the tears still wet on his face. Whatever the price, I'll take him. Jacob, no. Isaac pushed through the crowd, his face pale with horror. You can't. Think of your family. Think of $500. Jacob cut him off, his eyes never leaving the auctioneer's face. Cash. Today, Mr. Yoder. The sheriff approached carefully, his hand still on his holstered weapon. That animal has killed a man. He's too dangerous to $1,000. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer found his voice. Sir, I don't think you understand. This horse is scheduled for destruction. The county has $2,000. Jacob's voice rose. $2,000, and I take him today, now. Or do you want to explain to the county why you shot a horse worth that much, when you had a willing buyer? The auctioneer looked at the sheriff. The sheriff looked at the crowd. Everyone looked at Jacob, the quiet Amish farmer who'd barely spoken 10 words in 3 years, who now stood in an auction ring, making an insane offer for a killer horse. Sold. The auctioneer's hammer came down so fast it sounded like a gunshot. Sold to Jacob Yoder for $2,000. Get the papers ready and get that animal loaded before anyone changes their mind. The crowd erupted in whispers and shouts. Isaac grabbed Jacob's arm, his face a mixture of anger and fear. What have you done? What will you tell Rachel? What will you tell your children? Jacob watched as the handlers, moving with extreme caution now, managed to get a lead rope back on the stallion. The horse fought, but not as hard as before. His eyes kept finding Jacob's across the ring. I'll tell them the truth, Jacob said quietly. I'll tell them I bought a horse, a killer horse, a devil horse that's going to destroy your barn and maybe kill someone else. Why, Jacob? In God's name, why? Jacob was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of 3 years of unspeakable grief. Because, he said, watching as they loaded the stallion into a reinforced trailer, everyone deserves a second chance, even the broken ones, especially the broken ones. Isaac released his arm, his expression shifting from anger to something that looked almost like pity. You're not talking about the horse, are you? Jacob didn't answer. He turned and walked toward the auction office to fill out the paperwork that would make him the owner of the most dangerous horse in Ohio. Behind him, the stallion's scream echoed across the auction grounds, a sound of rage and pain, and something else. Something that might have been hope, if hope could sound like a war cry. Jacob's hands shook as he signed his name to the bill of sale. $2,000, nearly a third of his annual income. Money that should have gone to fixing the barn roof, to buying winter feed, to saving for Sarah's wedding someday. But as he pressed his thumb to the paper, leaving the ink mark that made it official, Jacob felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. He felt something. The ice around his heart cracked just a little, and through that crack came pain. Terrible, overwhelming pain that made him grip the counter to keep from falling. But pain meant feeling, and feeling meant being alive. And being alive, maybe that was the first step back from the edge of the abyss he'd been standing on for so long. "Lord help me," Jacob whispered, as he pocketed the bill of sale. "Lord help us both." Outside, thunder rumbled. The rain finally began to fall, washing across the October landscape like tears from heaven itself. And in the trailer, Devil's Shadow screamed again, a sound that could have been rage or terror, or maybe, just maybe, a kind of desperate prayer. The drive home from Kidron to the Yoder farm took 23 minutes on a normal day. Today, with the rain coming down in sheets and a hose trailer carrying 2,000 pounds of rage and terror swaying behind his pickup truck, it took Jacob nearly 40 minutes. He'd borrowed the truck and heavy-duty trailer from his English neighbor, Bill Henderson, who'd taken one look at Devil's Shadow and shaken his head so hard his baseball cap nearly flew off. "You've lost your mind, Jake," Bill had said, using the nickname only the English use. "That horse is gonna kill you, your family, or both. I'm only lending you this rig because I figure you'll need it to haul his carcass to the renderer when this goes south." Jacob hadn't argued. What could he say? Bill was probably right. The windshield wipers beat a rhythm against the rain, thump, 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 like a heartbeat. Or like the sound Samuel's small fists had made against the silo walls, trying to dig himself out of the corn that was suffocating him. Jacob's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Even now, 3 years later, he could still hear those sounds in his nightmares. Could still see the corn dust on his son's blue lips when they'd finally pulled him free. Too late. Always too late. Behind him the trailer rocked as the stallion kicked against the walls. The whole truck shook with the impact. Jacob glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see hooves burst through the metal. "What am I doing?" The question echoed in his mind, but he pushed it away. He couldn't afford doubt now, not when he'd just spent $2,000 money. Rachel had been saving for Daniel's education, money they'd scraped together from selling eggs and Rachel's quilts, and every spare penny they could find. "She's going to leave you," a voice whispered in his head. "She should have left you years ago." What kind of father can't protect his own son? What kind of husband becomes a ghost in his own house? Jacob's jaw clenched. The rain fell harder. The familiar turn onto Sugar Creek Road appeared through the downpour. 5 more minutes, and he'd be home. 5 more minutes, and he'd have to face Rachel. Have to see the disappointment in her eyes when she learned what he'd done. Have to watch Daniel's face light up with excitement before the boy realized his father had chosen a horse over his future. Thunder cracked overhead, and the stallion screamed in response, a sound so loud and fierce it made Jacob's ears ring even through the glass and metal separating them. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he'd told Isaac. "Even the broken ones. But what if some things were too broken to fix? What if the cracks went too deep, the damage too severe? What if he was wrong?" The Yoder farm appeared through the rain like a photograph from another life. The white 2-story farmhouse with its dark green shutters, the red barn that Samuel had loved to play in, pretending to be a knight defending his castle, the silo that now stood like a gravestone against the grey sky, the chicken coop where Sarah used to gather eggs every morning, singing hymns in her sweet, clear voice, before she'd stopped singing altogether. Jacob pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. For a moment he just sat there listening to the rain drum on the roof of the truck, feeling the trailer rock as the horse fought against his confinement. The front door of the house opened. Rachel rid in the doorway, her dark blue dress and white prayer cap, making her look like a figure from a painting. Even from here Jacob could see her face. The face he'd loved since he was 17 years old, now etched with lines of grief and exhaustion. Behind her, Daniel's small face appeared. The boy pushed past his mother and ran out into the rain, his bare feet splashing in puddles. At 8 years old, he was small for his age, thin and pale from spending too much time indoors, afraid to play in the barn or the fields where his brother had died. "Datat," Daniel's voice carried over the rain. "Did you buy a horse? Can I see it? Can I help take care of it?" Jacob climbed out of the truck slowly, his boots sinking into the mud. The rain soaked through his shirt in seconds, but he barely noticed. His eyes were on Rachel, who stood still as a statue in the doorway, her hand pressed to her mouth. She knew. Somehow she already knew. "Daniel, get back inside." Rachel's voice cut through the rain like a knife. "Now." "But ma'am." "Now, Daniel." The boy's shoulders slumped, but he obeyed, casting one last longing look at the trailer before disappearing into the house. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her 15-year-old face pale and guarded. She looked at her father, then at the trailer, then back at her father. Without a word, she took Daniel's hand and led him deeper into the house. Rachel walked down the porch steps, moving slowly, deliberately. She didn't run from the rain, didn't hurry, just walked toward Jacob with the kind of terrible calm that scared him more than any anger could. She stopped 3 feet away from him, close enough to touch, but the distance between them felt like miles. "Please tell me you didn't." Her voice was barely audible over the rain. "Please tell me you didn't buy that horse. The one that killed Martin Hostetler, the one they were going to put down." Jacob couldn't meet her eyes. "Rachel, how much?" "It doesn't matter. How much, Jacob?" The trailer rocked violently behind them. The stallion's scream split the air, wild and desperate. $2,000, Jacob said quietly. Rachel's face went white. For a moment, Jacob thought she might faint, but she didn't. Instead, she laughed, a short, bitter sound that held no humor at all. $2,000, she repeated. $2,000. That's Daniel's education fund. That's the money for Sarah's dowry. That's the money we needed to fix the barn roof before winter. Her voice rose with each word. That's the money I earned selling quilts every Saturday for 3 years while you... She couldn't finish. Tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. "I know," Jacob said. The words felt inadequate, pathetic. "I know, Rachel, but I had to. You had to. You had to buy a killer horse. You had to throw away our children's future." "For what, Jacob? For what?" Behind them, the stallion kicked the trailer wall so hard, the truck shook. Metal screamed against metal. "Because I'm dying," Jacob said. The words came out before he could stop them. "I'm dying, Rachel. I've been dying for 3 years, and I can't do it anymore. I can't keep pretending I'm alive when I'm not. I can't keep being nothing." Rachel stared at him, her eyes wide with shock and something else, something that looked almost like fear. "That horse in there," Jacob continued, the words pouring out like water from a broken dam. "Everyone's given up on him. Everyone says he's too dangerous, too broken, too far gone. They want to kill him because it's easier than trying to save him." He finally met her eyes. "Don't you see? That's me, Rachel, that's us. We're that horse. We're so broken we've forgotten what it's like to be whole. So you bought him? You bought a dangerous animal that could kill our children because you see yourself in him." Rachel's voice shook. "Have you gone completely mad?" "Maybe." Jacob took a step toward her. "Maybe I have. But Rachel, for 3 years I've felt nothing. Nothing. I couldn't cry at our son's funeral. I couldn't hold you when you needed me. I couldn't look at Daniel without seeing Samuel. I couldn't be a father, a husband, a person. I was just empty." The rain fell between them like a curtain. "But today," Jacob's voice cracked, "today, when I looked in that horse's eyes, I felt something. Pain, terrible, awful pain. But also hope. Hope that maybe something broken can heal. Hope that maybe it's not too late." Rachel was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet, Jacob had to lean in to hear it. "It is too late, Jacob." The words hit him like a physical blow. Too late to get the money back. Too late to undo this. Too late. She stopped, pressing her fist to her mouth. "Too late to what?" Jacob asked. Though he feared he knew the answer. Rachel looked at him, and in her eyes he saw his own grief reflected back at him. But he also saw something else. Anger. Years of anger that she'd swallowed down, pushed aside, buried under quilts and prayers, and the desperate need to hold what was left of their family together. "Too late to save us," she whispered. "We've been drowning for 3 years, Jacob. 3 years of you being a ghost in this house. 3 years of me trying to be strong enough for all of us. 3 years of Sarah crying herself to sleep every night, and Daniel asking me every single day why his debt doesn't love him anymore. I do love him. Then show him." Rachel's voice rose to a shout. "Show all of us, because buying a horse that could kill him is not love, Jacob. It's madness." The front door opened again. Daniel stood there, his small face tear-stained, his body trembling. "Is debt sending me away?" The boy's voice was so small, so broken. "Is that why he bought the horse? Because I'm not good enough? Because I'm not Samuel? Oh, Daniel." Rachel started toward him, but the boy ran past her, past Jacob, straight toward the barn, his bare feet slipping in the mud. "Daniel!" Rachel screamed. "Daniel, stop!" But the boy didn't stop. He disappeared into the barn, and even over the rain, they could hear his sobs. Rachel turned to Jacob, her face a mask of fury and despair. "Fix this," she said. "Fix what you've done. Because if you can't..." She couldn't finish. She just turned and walked back to the house, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Jacob stood alone in the rain, the weight of his choices crushing down on him like thousands of pounds of corn. Behind him, the stallion continued to fight against the trailer. In front of him, his family was falling apart. And inside him, that brief spark of hope flickered and threatened to die. "What have I done?" A crash from the barn made him spin around. Daniel's scream pierced through the rain, high and terrified. Jacob ran. His boots slipped in the mud, but he didn't slow down. The barn door hung open, swinging on its hinges. Inside, he could hear Daniel crying and the sound of wood splintering. "Daniel!" Jacob burst into the barn. "Daniel!" Where he froze. The boy had climbed up into the hayloft, the same loft where Samuel used to play, but the old ladder, weakened by 3 years of neglect, had given way. Daniel clung to a broken rung, his legs dangling 15 feet above the barn floor, above the old tractor with its sharp metal implements. Daniel's voice was pure terror. "Dad, help me. I can't hold on." Time seemed to slow. Jacob saw it all in perfect clarity. His youngest son, hanging by his small fingers, the wood cracking beneath his grip. One slip, one broken hold, and Daniel would fall, would die, just like Samuel. "Not again. Please, God, not again." Jacob moved. He didn't think, didn't plan, just acted. He grabbed a hay bale and dragged it beneath Daniel, then another and another, his muscles screaming with the effort. Too slow. The bales were too slow. "I'm slipping," Daniel cried. Hold on." Jacob positioned himself directly beneath his son. "Daniel, listen to me. When you fall, I'll catch you. I promise. I'm scared. I know you are. But I'm here. I'm right here, and I won't let you go." The rung cracked. Daniel fell. Jacob caught him. They went down together, Jacob taking the full impact as they hit the ground. Pain exploded through his back, his shoulders, but his arms stayed locked around his son, protecting him, keeping him safe. For a moment they just lay there in the hay and mud, breathing hard, Daniel's small body pressed against Jacob's chest. Then the boy started to cry, not the quiet, restrained tears that Amish children were taught to shed, but great, heaving sobs that shook his whole body. "I'm sorry," Dalian gasped between sobs. "I'm sorry, Dat. I wanted to die like Samuel. I wanted to die so you wouldn't be sad about him anymore, so you'd love me again." Jacob's heart shattered. He pulled Daniel closer, holding him tighter than he'd ever held anything in his life. And then, finally, he cried too. 3 years of tears that he'd locked away came pouring out, and he couldn't stop them. "No," Jacob sobbed into his son's hair. "No, Daniel, never. I love you. I love you so much. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." They cried together in the barn, father and son, while the rain hammered on the roof and the wind howled through the cracks in the walls. Outside, the stallion's screams had stopped. Rachel stood in the barn doorway, one hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Sarah peered beside her mother, her young face etched with the same grief and relief. Jacob looked up at them, his face wet with tears and rain and mud. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, to all of you." Rachel took a step forward, then another. She knelt beside Jacob and Daniel in the hay, and for the first time in 3 years, she touched her husband's face, really touched him, with tenderness and grief and love. "We can't keep doing this," she whispered. "We can't keep living like this." "I know," Jacob said. "I know. That's why I bought the horse. I have to try to fix something, Rachel. Even if it's the wrong thing. Even if it doesn't make sense. I have to try." Sarah moved closer, her thin arms wrapping around all of them. "The horse," she said softly, speaking more words than she'd spoken in weeks. "Can we really save him, Dat?" Jacob looked at his daughter, at his wife, at his son still trembling in his arms. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we can try. Together." A sound from outside made them all turn. The trailer had gone quiet. Too quiet. Jacob carefully set Daniel down and stood. His back screamed in protest, but he ignored it. He walked to the barn door and looked out at the trailer. Through the metal slats he could see one dark eye watching him. The stallion had stopped fighting. He just stood there, his sides heaving, his eye following Jacob's every movement. "What do we do now?" Rachel asked, coming to stand beside him. Jacob took a deep breath. "Now," he said, "we figure out how to get a killer horse out of a trailer and into a barn without anyone dying. And after that," Jacob looked at his wife, really looked at her for the first time in years. "After that, we figure out how to live again." The rain began to slow. Through the clouds, a single shaft of sunlight broke through, illuminating the trailer, the barn, the broken family standing in the doorway. It wasn't much, but it was a start. In the trailer, Devil's shadow shifted, his hooves thudding against the metal floor. Not kicking, not fighting, just waiting for whatever came next. Getting Devil's shadow out of the trailer and into the barn took 6 hours, 4 neighbors and more prayers than Jacob had spoken in the last 3 years combined. Bishop Eli Schrock arrived first, his buggy appearing through the mist that had replaced the afternoon rain. The old man's face was grave as he surveyed the scene. The reinforced trailer, the anxious family, and somewhere inside that metal box, a horse that had already killed one man. "Jacob Yoder," the bishop said, his voice carrying the weight of 67 years of wisdom and authority. "I've known you since you were Daniel's age. I baptized you. I married you to Rachel. I buried your son." He paused, his weathered hand gripping his walking stick. "And now I must ask you, have you lost your faith, or are you testing God's patience?" Jacob stood straighter, meeting the bishop's gaze. "Neither, Bishop. I'm trying to save something worth saving. A horse that kills, a horse that's been hurt. There's a difference." Bishop's eyes studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps, but know this, if that animal harms anyone in this community, the blood is on your hands. Jacob Yoder, do you accept this responsibility before God?" Jacob's throat tightened, but he nodded. "I do." "Then may God have mercy on us all." The bishop turned to the growing crowd of neighbors who had gathered despite the danger. "Who among you will help this foolish man with his impossible task?" Silence fell over the group. Men who had known Jacob his entire life suddenly found their boots very interesting. Women clutched their children closer. Then Isaac Miller stepped forward, his round face set with determination. I will. Someone has to make sure he doesn't get himself killed on the first day. Jonas Beachy, a young man of 23 who worked with horses, reluctantly raised his hand. I'll help too, but only because if that devil gets loose, he'll terrorize the whole county. One by one others joined, not out of belief in Jacob's mission, but out of duty to their community and concern for their neighbors' safety. Rachel stood on the porch with Sarah and Daniel, her face pale but resolute. She'd changed into dry clothes and had her arms wrapped protectively around their children. Jacob caught her eye across the distance, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a tentative truce. A willingness to see where this path led. Right then, Isaac said, clapping his hands together nervously, "What's the plan, Jacob? How do we move a horse that wants to kill us all?" Jacob had been thinking about this during the long, wet drive home. "We set up a chute from the trailer to the barn. Use panels to create a corridor he can't escape from. Guide him, don't force him. Guide a killer horse." Jonas laughed bitterly. "That's like trying to guide a tornado." "He's not a killer," Jacob said firmly. "He's scared and angry. There's a difference. Tell that to Martin Hustitler's widow." Jacob flinched, but didn't back down. "We build the chute. We do this carefully, and we pray." It took 2 hours to construct the corridor of wooden panels and metal gates, leading from the trailer to the largest stall in the barn, the one that had stood empty since Samuel died. Jacob had built it for a breeding stallion they'd planned to buy, back when the future held promise instead of pain. The stall was reinforced, double-walled, with heavy oak beams and steel-banded doors. It had cost a fortune they could barely afford, but now Jacob thanked God for that extravagance. If anything could hold Devil's shadow, this could. As the sun began to set, painting the Ohio sky in shades of orange and purple, they were read. Daniel, Sarah, Rachel called from the porch, inside the house. "Now." "But ma'am," Daniel started. "Now." There was no arguing with that tone. The children retreated, but Jacob could see Daniel's face pressed against the window, watching with wide eyes. Jacob approached the trailer slowly, acutely aware of every eye upon him. Inside he could hear the stallion moving, his hooves striking the metal floor in an agitated rhythm. "Easy," Jacob called softly. "Easy, boy. Nobody's going to hurt you." A snort answered him, disbelieving and angry. Jacob reached the rear gate of the trailer. Through the gaps in the metal, he could see Devil's Shadow's massive body, coiled tight with tension. The horse's coat was dark, with sweat, despite the cooling evening air. "When I open this," Jacob said to the men gathered behind him, "everyone stay back. Let him come out on his own. No sudden moves, no noise, and if he charges," Jonas asked. "Then you run," Jacob said simply. "But I don't think he will. Not if we give him space." Isaac muttered something that sounded like a prayer. The other men gripped their tools, ropes, poles, anything that might help if things went wrong. Jacob's hand found the latch. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. If the horse bolted, if he attacked, people could die. His neighbors, his friends, maybe him. "Is this worth it?" the voice in his head asked. "Is one horse worth risking everything?" But Jacob knew it wasn't just about the horse anymore. It was about proving that something broken could heal. That redemption was possible. That the last 3 years of sleepwalking through life didn't have to be all that remained of Jacob Yoder. He opened the latch. The sound of metal scraping metal echoed across the farmyard. Inside the trailer, Devil's Shadow went absolutely still. Jacob swung the gate open and stepped back, giving the horse room. For a long moment, nothing happened. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly, Devil's Shadow appeared. First his head black as midnight, with a white star on his forehead that Jacob hadn't noticed before. Then his neck, arched and powerful. Then his massive shoulders and chest, muscles rippling beneath his sweat-darkened coat. He stepped out of the trailer with surprising grace, his hooves finding the ground with barely a sound. He stood at the top of the ramp, surveying his surroundings with eyes that missed nothing. The gathered crowd took a collective step backward. The stallion's ears swiveled, catching every sound. His nostrils flared, scenting the air, and his eyes, those dark, troubled eyes, found Jacob's for a heartbeat. Neither moved. Then Devil's shadow descended the ramp. Each step was deliberate, controlled. This was no panicked flight, no wild charge. The horse moved with the deadly precision of a predator, his attention never leaving Jacob. Jacob stood his ground, though every instinct screamed at him to run. "Easy," he said softly. "Nobody here wants to hurt you." The stallion reached the bottom of the ramp and paused. He was less than 20 feet from Jacob now, close enough that Jacob could see the old scars on his neck, the fresh wounds from fighting the ropes at the auction. Close enough to see the intelligence in those eyes, and the pain. So much pain. "I know you're scared," Jacob continued, his voice low and steady. "I know you don't trust anyone, but you're home now. This is your home, if you want it." Devil's shadow's ears flicked forward, listening. "See that barn?" Jacob gestured slowly toward the building. "There's a stall in there. It's big, it's clean, and it's yours. There's hay and water. Tomorrow, if you let me, I'll check those cuts on your neck. Make sure they don't get infected." The horse snorted, a sound that could have been derision or disbelief. "I know," Jacob said. "Why should you believe me? Everyone else has hurt you. Everyone else has tried to break you. Why should I be different?" He took a small step forward. Behind him, Isaac gasped, but Jacob ignored him. "I should be different, because I understand," Jacob said. "I understand what it's like to hurt so bad you want to hurt back. To be so angry at the world that you forget how to be anything else. To have everyone look at you and see something dangerous, something to be afraid of." Another step. Devil's shadow's muscles tensed, but he didn't retreat, didn't attack. "I understand what it's like to lose yourself," Jacob's voice cracked. "To wake up one day and not recognize the monster you've become. To know you're scaring the people who love you, but not knowing how to stop." Jacob was close enough now to reach out and touch the horse. Close enough to die if the stallion decided to strike. "But I also believe," Jacob whispered, "that we can find our way back, both of us, if we're brave enough to try." He extended his hand, palm up, fingers relaxed. The farmyard fell silent. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. The only sound was the wind rustling through the corn in the distant fields and the soft breathing of the horse. Devil's shadow looked at Jacob's hand, then at his face, then back at his hand. Slowly, so slowly Jacob could count his own heartbeats. The stallion lowered his head. His nose touched Jacob's palm. The contact lasted only a second before the horse jerked back, snorting his distrust. But it was enough. It was a start. "Good boy," Jacob said softly. "That's a good boy." He turned and began walking toward the barn, toward the chute they'd built. He didn't look back to see if the horse would follow. He just walked, his steps steady and sure, trusting in something he couldn't name. Behind him, he heard hooves on packed earth. Devil's shadow was following. The crowd parted like water as Jacob led the stallion through the chute. The horse's eyes rolled at the narrow passage, at the wooden walls hemming him in. But he didn't bolt. He just followed Jacob, step by cautious step. They reached the barn. The large stall stood open, fresh hay piled in one corner, a water trough filled to the brim. Jacob stepped aside, giving the horse a clear path to the stall. Devil's shadow paused at the entrance, his head high, his nostrils flaring. Jacob could see him weighing his options, attack, flee, or trust. "It's okay," Jacob said. "It's safe. I promise." The stallion looked at him one more time, and Jacob could have sworn he saw a question in those dark eyes. "Can I believe you?" Then Devil's shadow walked into the stall. The moment his hooves crossed the threshold, Jonas slammed the door shut, throwing the heavy bolt home. The spell broke. The horse wheeled, suddenly realizing he was trapped. He screamed, a sound of rage and betrayal that made everyone's blood run cold. "I'm sorry," Jacob said, his heart breaking at the terror in the animal's eyes. "I'm sorry, but it has to be this way, for now. Until you understand that you're safe, Devil's Shadow charged the door, his hooves striking the oak with enough force to shake the entire barn. Again and again he struck, his screams echoing off the rafters. "He's going to break through," Jonas shouted. "He's going to kill himself trying." But Jacob stood firm. "He'll stop. When he realizes the door won't break, he'll stop. And if he doesn't..." Jacob didn't answer. He couldn't, because he honestly didn't know. The assault on the door continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. With each strike, Jacob flinched, feeling every blow in his own chest. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The stallion stood in the center of the stall, his sides heaving, his coat dark with sweat. He was trembling, not with rage now, but with exhaustion and fear. "There," Jacob said softly. "There now, it's over." The horse's eyes found his through the bars of the door. In them, Jacob saw his own reflection, broken, exhausted, trapped in a cage of his own making, but also alive, still fighting, still hoping. "We'll get through this," Jacob promised, as much to himself as to the horse. "Both of us." Somehow, the neighbors began to disperse, muttering among themselves. The consensus was clear. Jacob Yoder had indeed lost his mind, and it was only a matter of time before the horse killed him. Isaac lingered, his face troubled. "Jacob," he said quietly, "that animal, he's not going to forgive you for trapping him. You saw his eyes, he thinks you betrayed him." "I know," Jacob said, his gaze never leaving the stallion. "That's why I have to earn his trust, starting tomorrow. And if you can't," Jacob finally looked at his old friend, "then I'll have spent $2,000 to learn what I already knew, that some things are too broken to fix." Isaac shook his head sadly and left. Alone in the barn, Jacob approached the stall door. Devil's Shadow stood at the far wall, as far from Jacob as he could get, his body still trembling with adrenaline and fear. "I know you hate me right now," Jacob said, "and you have every right to, but I want you to know something. I won't give up on you, even if it takes years, even if you never trust me, I won't give up." The horse turned away, presenting his hind quarters, a clear message of dismissal and distrust. Jacob's heart sank, but he'd expected this. Trust once broken couldn't be rebuilt in a day. He left the barn as full darkness fell, his body aching from the day's exertions and from catching Daniel's fall. Every step hurt, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the weight of what he'd taken on. The house glowed with lamplight, warm and inviting, and so far from the cold barn where a damaged horse stood in the darkness, hating him. Rachel met him at the door. She'd clearly been waiting, her hands twisting in her apron, her face tight with worry. "Is he secured?" she asked. "Yeah." "And are you hurt?" Jacob shook his head, though his back screamed otherwise. Rachel studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside to let him enter. "The children are in bed. Daniel finally stopped crying about an hour ago. Sarah," she paused. "Sarah wrote something. She asked me to give this to you." She handed him a folded piece of paper. Jacob opened it with trembling fingers. Sarah's neat handwriting filled the page. "Dear Dad, I know why you bought the horse. I understand because I feel the same way. Ever since Samuel died, I feel like I'm trapped in a stall too. Like I'm screaming and screaming, but nobody can hear me. Maybe if you can save the horse, it means we can all be saved. I want to help. Please let me help. Love, Sarah." Jacob's vision blurred with tears. He looked up at Rachel, who had tears streaming down her own cheeks. "She gave it to me to read first," Rachel said. "Jacob, our children are drowning. We're all drowning, and I don't know if a horse can save us, but..." She took a shaky breath. "But we have to try something, because what we're doing now isn't living. It's just existing." Jacob pulled his wife into his arms for the first time in months. She stiffened at first, then slowly, tentatively relaxed into his embrace. "I'm scared," she whispered against his chest. "I'm so scared that you'll get hurt, that the children will get hurt, that we'll lose even more than we've already lost." "I'm scared too," Jacob admitted, "but I'm more scared of what happens if we don't try." They stood there in the doorway, holding each other while the night deepened around them. In the barn, Devil's Shadow paced his stall, his hoofbeats marking time like a countdown to something, disaster or redemption. only God knew which. And in the house, two children lay awake in their beds, listening to their parents' embrace for the first time in years, hoping against hope that maybe, just maybe, their family could be whole again. The first day was over. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Jacob woke at 4:30 a.m., like he had every morning for the past 25 years. But this morning was different. This morning, the knot of dread that usually greeted him had loosened just slightly, replaced by something he barely recognized. Purpose. He dressed quietly in the darkness, not wanting to wake Rachel, who slept beside him for the first time in months. Last night, after they'd held each other in the doorway, she'd followed him upstairs instead of retreating to Sarah's room, where she'd been sleeping. They hadn't spoken much, but her presence in their bed had been a balm to wounds Jacob hadn't known how to name. The house was silent as he descended the stairs, his boots in his hand to avoid waking the children. The kitchen still held the faint smell of last night's dinner, chicken and dumplings that Rachel had made, that they'd all eaten together at the same table for the first time in weeks. Daniel had talked non-stop about the horse, his eyes bright with excitement. Sarah had been quiet, but she'd smiled, a small, tentative thing, but a smile nonetheless. Outside, the October morning was cold and crisp. Frost sparkled on the grass like scattered diamonds, and Jacob's breath formed clouds in the air. The barn loomed ahead, dark and silent, holding within it 2,000 pounds of danger and desperation. Jacob's steps slowed as he approached. What would he find? Would Devil's Shadow have injured himself in the night, throwing himself against the walls in a frenzy? Would he be dead, his great heart finally giving out under the weight of his fear and rage? Or worse, would he simply be waiting, eyes full of hatred, planning his revenge for the betrayal? Jacob pushed open the barn door. The hinges creaked, sounding impossibly loud in the pre-dawn quiet. Inside, he could hear movement from the stall, the shift of hooves on straw, the heavy breathing of a large animal. He lit the lantern hanging by the door, and warm yellow light spilled across the barn. Jacob made his way to the stall, his heart hammering. Devil's Shadow stood in the far corner, as far from the door as he could get. His head was high, his ears pinned back, his dark eyes following Jacob's every movement. The stall showed signs of the night's struggle, gouges in the wooden walls where he'd kicked, straw scattered everywhere, the water trough overturned. But the horse was uninjured, exhausted, yes, wary, absolutely, but alive and whole. "Good morning," Jacob said softly, stopping several feet from the door. "I know you didn't sleep well, neither did I, truth be told." The stallion snorted, his ears flicking forward briefly before pinning back again. Jacob set down the bucket of grain he'd brought. "I have breakfast for you, fresh oats with a bit of molasses." Rachel suggested the molasses. She said every creature deserves a little sweetness in their life. He opened the small feed door at the bottom of the stall, a door too small for a horse to fit through, but large enough to pass a bucket. Slowly, carefully, he slid the grain bucket inside. Devil's Shadow eyed it suspiciously but didn't approach. "I understand," Jacob said. "You think it might be poisoned, or maybe you're just too proud to eat while I'm watching. That's okay. I'll leave it there for you." He settled onto a hay bale across from the stall, making himself comfortable. The horse's ears flicked forward again, clearly confused by this behavior. "You're probably wondering what I'm doing," Jacob said. "Truth is, I'm not entirely sure myself. Bishop Eli would say I'm tempting fate. My wife would say I'm avoiding the morning chores. But I think I'm just trying to let you know you're not alone." The stallion shifted his weight, his muscles still tense but perhaps not quite as rigid as before. Jacob began to talk. He talked about the farm, how his grandfather had built this barn in 1923, how the boards had been milled from oak trees that grew on the property. He talked about Samuel, his voice breaking only slightly, describing how the boy had loved to climb into the hayloft and pretend he was a bird looking down on the world. He talked about Rachel's quilts, how each one told a story in fabric and thread. He talked about Sarah's dreams of becoming a teacher, and Daniel's fear of heights that made climbing anything, even the porch steps, an act of courage. He talked and talked, his voice low and steady, filling the barn with words that were half confession, half prayer. The sun began to rise, sending shafts of golden light through the gaps in the barn walls, and slowly, incrementally, Devil's shadow began to relax. His head lowered slightly. His ears, while not friendly, were no longer pinned in outright aggression. And when Jacob paused in his story, the horse took 3 careful steps toward the grain bucket. Jacob's breath caught, but he didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as the stallion approached the food, sniffed it thoroughly, then took a cautious bite. It was such a small thing, a horse eating breakfast, but to Jacob, it felt like a victory. "Good boy," he whispered. "That's a good boy." Devil's shadow's ear twitched in his direction, but the horse kept eating. They stayed like that until the grain was gone. Man and horse, separated by wooden bars, but connected by something fragile and new, something that might, with time and patience, become trust. The next week fell into a rhythm. Every morning Jacob arrived at the barn before dawn. He'd bring grain, fresh water, and hay. He'd clean the stall as best he could, while Devil's shadow retreated to the far corner, watching his every move, with suspicious eyes. And then he'd sit and talk, until the sun rose fully and the demands of the farm called him away. Slowly the horse began to accept his presence. By the 3rd day, Devil's shadow no longer pressed himself against the far wall when Jacob entered the barn. By the 5th day, he would eat while Jacob was still in the barn, though he kept the width of the stall between them. Progress, Jacob told himself, small, hard-won progress. But the rest of the community wasn't impressed. "He's wasting time on that devil horse while his fields need plowing," Jacob heard someone say at the general store. "Rachel looks exhausted," another woman whispered, "having to do all the work herself while her husband plays with that killer animal. It's been a week, and he hasn't even touched the horse," Bishop Eli said at Sunday meeting, his voice carrying across the benches. "Pride comes before a fall, Jacob Yoder. Remember, Jacob bore the criticism in silence, but each comment cut deeper than the last, because they were right. The farm was suffering. Rachel was working twice as hard to compensate for the hours he spent in the barn. And what did he have to show for it? A horse that still wouldn't let him within 10 feet. On the 8th day, everything changed. Jacob arrived at the barn as usual, but something felt different. The air seemed charged, electric with possibility or danger. He couldn't tell. Devil's shadow stood in the center of the stall, not in his usual corner. His head was up, his ears forward, and his eyes were different, less angry, more curious. "Good morning," Jacob said, his voice barely above a whisper. The horse nickered, a sound so unexpected that Jacob nearly dropped the grain bucket. "Well," Jacob said, his heart racing. "That's new." He went through his usual routine, grain through the small door, fresh water, a quick cleaning of the stall's edges. But today, Devil's shadow didn't retreat. He stayed in the center of the stall, watching Jacob with an intensity that was unnerving. When Jacob settled onto his hay bale, the horse took a step toward him, then another, and another. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. The stallion was approaching the stall door, approaching him of his own free will. "Easy," Jacob whispered. "Easy, boy." Devil's shadow stopped 3 feet from the bars, close enough that Jacob could see the individual whiskers on his muzzle, the flecks of brown in his dark eyes, close enough that if the horse wanted to strike, Jacob would have no time to react. They stood like that for a long moment, man and horse, separated by iron bars and years of pain. Then slowly Jacob reached through the bars. His hand shook as it extended into the stall, palm up, fingers relaxed. He expected the horse to bolt, expected him to strike, expected anything but what happened. Devil's shadow lowered his head and pressed his nose into Jacob's palm. The touch was warm and soft, the horse's breath tickling Jacob's skin. Jacob could feel the stallion's whiskers, could smell the sweet scent of hay on his breath, could feel the slight tremble that ran through the powerful body. "There you are," Jacob whispered, tears streaming down his face. There you are. For the first time in a week, the horse stood still and let himself be touched, let himself trust, even if only for a moment. The barn door burst open. Daniel stood in the doorway, his small face alight with excitement. "Dat, Dat, can I see the horse? Can I?" Devil's shadow exploded backward, his scream of terror splitting the air. He reared, his hooves striking the air, his eyes rolling white with panic. "Daniel, no!" Jacob shouted, but it was too late. The boy, frozen in fear at the horse's reaction, stood rooted in the doorway. Devil's shadow came down hard, his hooves slamming into the stall door with enough force to crack one of the support beams. The entire structure shuddered. "Get out!" Jacob yelled at Daniel. "Get out now!" Daniel ran, his sobs echoing as he fled back to the house. Jacob turned back to the stall to find Devil's Sass once again pressed against the far wall, trembling with adrenaline and fear. All the progress they'd made vanished in an instant. "No," Jacob said, his own hands shaking. "No, no, no, please." We were so close, but the horse wouldn't even look at him now. He stood with his hindquarters to the door, his head pressed into the corner, completely shut down. Jacob slumped onto the hay bale, his head in his hands. 1 week of patient work, destroyed in seconds. The fragile trust they'd built, shattered like glass. He didn't know how long he sat there. Minutes, hours, time seemed to lose meaning in the wake of such crushing disappointment. "Jacob?" He looked up to find Rachel standing in the barn doorway, her face pale. "Daniel is inconsolable. He thinks he's ruined everything. He has," Jacob said, then immediately regretted it at the flash of pain in Rachel's eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean. It's not his fault. It's mine. I should have locked the barn door. Should have told him to stay away. Should have, would have, could have," Rachel said softly, moving closer. "We could drive ourselves mad with should-haves, Jacob. God knows I have enough of my own." She looked past him to the horse in the stall. "Is he all right?" "Physically, yes. But the trust?" Jacob shook his head. "I don't know if we can get it back." Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "What was it like when he let you touch him?" Jacob's throat tightened. "It was like coming back to life, like remembering what it feels like to hope." "Then you try again," Rachel said firmly. "Tomorrow you come back and you try again, because if a horse can teach you to hope, Jacob, then he's worth more than $2,000. He's worth everything." Jacob looked at his wife, really looked at her. In the soft morning light, he could see the lines that grief had carved into her face, the exhaustion in her eyes, the strength it took for her to keep going, day after day. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "No," she agreed, but there was the ghost of a smile on her lips. "But you're stuck with me anyway, for better or worse. Remember, for better or worse." Rachel moved to leave, then paused. "Jacob, the children want to help. Sarah, especially. She's been reading every book about horses she can find at the library. And Daniel, he needs to feel like he can fix what he broke." Jacob started to shake his head, but Rachel held up her hand. "I know it's dangerous. I know every instinct you have says to keep them away, but they need this too. We all need to be part of the healing, or we're just spectators in our own recovery." She left before Jacob could argue. He sat alone in the barn, watching the morning light strengthen, listening to Devil's Shadow's breathing slowly return to normal. The horse still wouldn't turn around, still pressed himself into the corner like he wanted to disappear into the wood itself. "I'm sorry," Jacob said quietly. "I'm sorry you were scared. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from that. But I'm not giving up. Tomorrow, I'll be back. And the day after that. And the day after that. However long it takes." No response from the horse. Jacob stood, his joints protesting. As he reached the barn door, he paused and looked back. "My son asked me once, before he died, if God forgives us when we make mistakes," Jacob said. "I told him yes, absolutely, without question, but I never thought to ask. Who forgives us when we can't forgive ourselves? He left the barn, leaving the question hanging in the air. Behind him, in the stall, Devil's Shadow's ear twitched. Just once, just for a second, but it was enough to suggest he might have been listening after all. That night, after dinner, there was a knock on the door. Jacob opened it to find Jonas Beachy standing on the porch, his hat in his hands. "Jonas," Jacob said, surprised. The young horse trainer had made no secret of his disapproval of Jacob's purchase. "Mr. Yoder," Jonas said formally, I wanted to apologize for what I said at the auction, and for," he trailed off looking uncomfortable. "For what?" Jonas took a deep breath. "For giving up on the horse. I worked with him, you know, before Martin bought him. Spent 3 days trying to break him, and all I got was bruises and a broken rib. I told Martin the horse was impossible. Told him to send him to slaughter before someone got killed." Jonas's eyes met Jacob's, but then Martin tried anyway and died. "And I thought that proved I was right. That some things are too broken to fix. And now?" Jacob asked. "Now I don't know," Jonas admitted. "But I heard what happened today. How the horse let you touch him. How he trusted you, even for just a moment." He swallowed hard, "and I realized I gave up too easy. On the horse. On other things too." Jacob understood. Jonas had lost his father 2 years ago in a farming accident. Had inherited a farm he wasn't sure he could manage. Had gotten engaged to a girl who'd then broken it off, saying he was too angry, too bitter. "Would you like to help?" Jacob asked. "With Devil's Shadow?" Jonas looked shocked. "You'd let me? After Everyone deserves a second chance," Jacob said. "Even those who've given up hope." Jonas blinked rapidly, and Jacob realized the young man was fighting tears. "Thank you," Jonas whispered. "I'll be here tomorrow, early." As Jonas left, Jacob felt something shift inside him. The work with Devil's Shadow wasn't just about saving a horse anymore. It was becoming something bigger, a testament to the possibility of redemption, of healing, of finding hope in the darkest places. That night, Jacob dreamed. He dreamed of Samuel, but not as he'd last seen him, blue-lipped and still, corn dust in his hair. Instead, he dreamed of Samuel at 5 years old, laughing as he chased butterflies through the fields. In the dream, Samuel turned and waved, his smile bright as sunshine. "It's okay, Dat," the dream Samuel said. "You can let go now. I'm okay." Jacob woke with tears on his face and Rachel's hand in his. "You were talking in your sleep," she said softly, saying Samuel's name. "I dreamed about him," Jacob said. "He told me it was okay to let go." Rachel's breath caught. Do you think you can?" Jacob thought about Devil's Shadow, standing in his stall, learning to trust again. About Sarah, reading horsebooks and hoping for a chance to help. About Daniel crying because he thought he'd ruined everything. About Jonas, asking for a second chance. About himself, feeling something again after 3 years of numbness. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I think I can try." Rachel leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then that's enough. For now, that's enough." Outside in the barn, Devil's Shadow stood at his stall door, his ears forward, listening to the sounds of the night, waiting for morning, waiting for another chance. The autumn leaves fell like copper rain across the Yoder farm as October gave way to November. 3 weeks had passed since Devil's Shadow arrived, and the rhythm of the household had shifted to accommodate the massive black stallion who ruled the barn like a wounded king. Every morning Jacob, Jonas, and sometimes Sarah worked with the horse. They'd progressed from touching through the bars to entering the stall, though the horse still maintained a careful distance, circling them like they were predators he couldn't quite trust. Daniel was forbidden from the barn. The rule broke the boy's heart, but after that first disastrous interruption, Jacob couldn't risk another setback. Still, every evening Daniel would stand at the window, watching the barn with longing eyes that made Jacob's chest ache. On this particular morning, frost covered everything like sugar on a cake. Jacob's breath formed clouds as he walked to the barn, his boots crunching on frozen grass. Inside he found Jonas already there, sitting quietly outside Devil's Shadow's stall. "He's been restless all night," Jonas said softly. "I heard him from my place down the road, pacing, calling out. Something's bothering him." Jacob approached the stall carefully. The stallion stood in the center, his head high, his ears swiveling constantly. There was a wildness in his eyes that Jacob hadn't seen in days, a look that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Easy, boy," Jacob said. "What's wrong?" Devil's Shadow tossed his head, his nostrils flaring. He moved to the stall door, then away, then back again, a dance of agitation that set Jacob's nerves on edge. "Maybe there's a storm coming," Jonas suggested. "Horses can sense weather changes." But Jacob didn't think it was the weather. This felt different, more urgent. Sarah appeared in the barn doorway, her cloak pulled tight against the cold. At 15 she'd grown into a young woman, though grief had stolen some of the softness from her face. Working with Devil's Shadow had brought a spark back to her eyes, but this morning they were troubled. "Dirt," she said. "There are men coming up the road. English men, in a big truck with animal control written on the side." Jacob's blood ran cold. "Get to the house, now. Both of you, but Dirt." "Now, Sarah." The girl ran. Jonas started to follow, but Jacob grabbed his arm. "Stay, I might need a witness." Two men in official-looking uniforms strode into the barn moments later. The older one, a heavy-set man with a graying mustache, carried a clipboard. The younger one had a rifle. "Jacob Yoder?" the older man asked. I'm Officer Dale Mitchell, Holmes County Animal Control. This is Officer Ryan Peters. We've had complaints about a dangerous animal on your property." Jacob's jaw tightened. "My horse is secured. He's on my property. He hasn't hurt anyone." "Yet," Officer Mitchell said. "Yoder, that animal killed a man. We've received multiple complaints from neighbors expressing concern for their safety and the safety of their children. My neighbors need to mind their own business. When it comes to public safety, it becomes everyone's business." Mitchell consulted his clipboard. "We have the authority to seize and destroy animals deemed a threat to the community. Multiple witnesses have testified that this horse is dangerous and unpredictable." "He's neither," Jacob said, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "He's been traumatized, yes, but he's healing. We're making progress." "Progress." Officer Peters spoke for the first time, his hand resting on the rifle. "I heard he nearly broke through his stall last week. That he attacked you." "He didn't attack anyone. He was startled, that's all." Officer Mitchell sighed. "Mr. Yoder, I understand you've invested money in this animal, but sometimes the merciful thing is to let go. That horse has been abused, fought, broken. Even if you could train him, the psychological damage is exactly why he needs more time." Jacob interrupted. His voice rose despite his attempt to stay calm. "You're talking about destroying him because he's been hurt. That's not justice. That's giving up." Behind them, Devil's Shadow began to pace again, his hooves striking the ground with increasing agitation. He could sense the tension, the threat these men represented. "We're giving you 2 weeks," Officer Mitchell said. 2 weeks to show significant improvement. If we receive one more complaint, if there's one more incident, we're coming back with a court order. And Mr. Yoder, if that horse hurts anyone at all, you'll be held legally responsible. Do you understand?" Jacob understood. They were giving him a death sentence with a brief stay of execution. "I understand." The officers left, but their threat hung in the air like smoke. Jacob slumped against the stall door, his legs suddenly weak. 2 weeks, Jonas said quietly. "Jacob, that's not enough time. He won't even let us halter him yet. How are we supposed to show significant improvement in 2 weeks? Jacob didn't answer. He was watching Devil's Shadow, who'd stopped pacing and now stood perfectly still, his dark eyes fixed Dawn. Jacob with an intensity that was unnerving. "We do the impossible," Jacob finally said. "We do what everyone says can't be done. And if we fail, then I lose him." Jacob's voice cracked. "Then I lose everything." That night, Jacob couldn't sleep. He lay beside Rachel, listening to her soft breathing, his mind racing through impossible scenarios. How could he prove the horse was safe when he couldn't even put a halter on him? How could he show progress when every step forward seemed to be followed by 2 steps back? At midnight, he gave up trying to sleep. He dressed quietly and slipped out of the house, drawn to the barn by a force he couldn't name. The November night was bitter cold, but Jacob barely felt it. He lit the lantern in the barn and approached Devil's Shadow's stall. The horse was awake, standing alert in the center of his stall. His ears pricked forward when he saw Jacob, and something in his expression seemed almost expectant. "Couldn't sleep either?" Jacob asked, settling onto his usual hay bale. "I suppose you heard them today, the men who want to kill you." Devil's Shadow snorted, tossing his head. "I won't let them," Jacob said fiercely. "I won't, but I need your help. I need you to trust me, really trust me, enough to let me put a halter on you, enough to show those men that you're not dangerous." The stallion moved closer to the stall door, closer than he'd ever come when Jacob was sitting there. Close enough that Jacob could have reached through the bars and touched him. "I know you're scared," Jacob continued. "I know every person who's touched you has hurt you, but not me. I promise you, not me. I would rather die than hurt you." Devil's Shadow's head lowered slightly. His ears relaxed. Jacob stood slowly, careful not to make any sudden movement. He moved to the stall door and opened it. Jonas would have called him crazy. Rachel would have been terrified. The animal control officers would have said it proved the horse was too dangerous. But Jacob stepped into the stall. Devil's Shadow tensed immediately, his muscles coiling like springs. Jacob could see the calculations happening behind those intelligent eyes, fight or flight, attack or retreat. "It's just me," Jacob said softly, staying near the door, giving the horse an escape route if he needed it. "Just me, and I'm not going to hurt you." For a long moment, they stood there, man and horse in the lamplight, both holding their breath. Then, miracle of miracles, Devil's Shadow took a step toward him. Then another. Then he was there, right in front of Jacob. So close Jacob could feel the heat radiating from his body. The stallion lowered his head, his nose almost touching Jacob's chest. Jacob raised his hand slowly, so slowly, and placed it on the horse's neck. The stallion trembled but didn't pull away. "Good boy," Jacob whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Such a good, brave boy." He ran his hand along the horse's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the silky coat, feeling the scars from old wounds, feeling the life and warmth and strength. Devil's Shadow leaned into the touch. Jacob's other hand came up to stroke the horse's face, his fingers gentle on the soft nose, the whiskers, the white star on his forehead. "I see you," Jacob said. "Not the monster everyone else sees. I see you, the real you. And you're beautiful." The horse's eyes closed just for a moment, as if the words or the touch, or maybe just the acceptance, was too much to bear. They stood like that for a long time, man and horse, touching in the quiet barn while the world slept around them. Then Jacob did something that surprised even himself. He wrapped his arms around the stallion's neck and pressed his forehead against the warm coat. "Help me save you," he whispered. "Please, I can't lose you two. I can't." Devil's Shadow stood perfectly still, his breath warm on Jacob's shoulder, his great body solid and real and alive under Jacob's embrace. When Jacob finally finaled back, his face was wet with tears. The horse looked at him with an expression that seemed almost tender. "Tomorrow," Jacob said, "I'm going to try to put a halter on you, and I know that scares you. I know the halter means pain and force and everything bad that's ever happened to you, but I need you to try. Can you try? For me?" The stallion's ear flicked toward him. "I'll take that as a maybe," Jacob said with a watery smile. He left the stall slowly, reluctantly. At the door he turned back. Devil's Shadow stood watching him, his head still lowered, his posture relaxed in a way Jacob had never seen. "Thank you," Jacob said, "for trusting me." As he walked back to the house, the first snowflakes of winter began to fall. They drifted down like blessings, coating the world in white, making everything clean and new. In the house, he found Rachel sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold in front of her. "I saw you," she said quietly, from the window. "I saw you go into the stall." Jacob waited for the anger, the fear, the accusations of recklessness. Instead, Rachel stood and crossed the room to him. She took his face in her hands and kissed him, really kissed him, for the first time in years. "You're going to save him," she said, when they broke apart. "I don't know how, but you're going to save him. And in saving him, you're saving us." "Rachel, I felt it," she interrupted. "When I watched you with that horse, I felt something I hadn't felt in so long. Hope, real hope. Not the kind we pretend to have in church, but the kind that makes your chest hurt, because it's so big and scary and possible." Jacob pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I'm scared," he admitted. "What if I fail? What if—" "Then we fail together," Rachel said. "But we try with everything we have." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Jacob stood in the barn with Jonas and Sarah, a simple rope halter in his hands. "Are you sure about this?" Jonas asked for the 10th time. "Maybe we should wait another week, build more trust." "We don't have another week," Jacob said. "We have 13 days, and that horse needs to show progress, or they'll take him away and destroy him." Sarah's hand found her father's. "He'll let you," she said, with the confidence of youth. "I know he will." Jacob wished he had her certainty. He entered the stall alone. Devil's Shadow stood in the center, watching him with those deep, dark eyes. The horse had to know what was coming, had to recognize the halter Jacob held, had to remember all the times that simple piece of rope had meant pain and domination. "Hey boy," Jacob said softly, approaching slowly, "I know what this represents to you. I know you hate it, but I need you to trust that I'm different, that this time will be different." The stallion's ears went back, not pinned in aggression, but flattened in fear. "I know," Jacob soothed. "I know, but it's just rope. It can't hurt you. Not if you don't fight it." He was close now, close enough to touch. The halter hung from his hand like a serpent. Devil's Shadow's eyes were on it, tracking every movement. His breathing quickened, his muscles tensed. "Easy," Jacob whispered. "Easy now." He raised the halter slowly toward the horse's face. Devil's Shadow's head went up, out of reach. His whole body coiled, ready to explode into violence or flight. "Please," Jacob said, his voice breaking. "Please, boy, I need you to try. Just try." For a moment, nothing happened. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, so slowly it was barely perceptible, Devil's Shadow lowered his head. Not all the way. Not to where Jacob could easily slip the halter on, but lower, an offering, a tentative, terrified act of trust. Jacob's hands shook as he raised the halter. The rope touched the horse's nose. Devil's Shadow flinched but didn't pull away. Higher, the halter slipped over his ears. The stallion's whole body trembled, his eyes rolling white with fear. But he stood and let Jacob fasten the halter behind his ears. "Good boy," Jacob breathed, tears streaming down his face. "Oh, such a good, brave boy." He attached a lead rope to the halter with trembling fingers. Then, incredibly, impossibly, he led Devil's Shadow out of the stall. The horse moved stiffly, every muscle taut with tension, his head high and his eyes showing white. But he moved. He followed Jacob into the barn aisle, his hooves ringing on the concrete. Jonas and Sarah stood frozen in shock. "He did it," Sarah whispered. "Dat, he did it." Jacob led the stallion in a small circle, then another. With each step, Devil's Shadow relaxed slightly. The world didn't end. The halter didn't bring pain. Jacob didn't betray his trust. After 10 minutes, Jacob led him back to the stall and removed the halter. The moment it came off, Devil's Shadow snorted and shook his head violently, as if shaking off the memory of every bad thing that had ever happened to him. But when Jacob scratched behind his ears, the horse leaned into the touch. "We did it," Jacob said, his voice filled with wonder. We actually did it. Jonas was grinning ear to ear. That was incredible. I've never seen anything like it. Sarah threw her arms around her father. I knew he could do it. I knew you could do it. But Jacob knew the truth. It wasn't just him. It wasn't even the horse. It was something bigger than both of them. A choice to trust, despite every reason not to hope despite overwhelming evidence that hope was foolish, to try despite the certainty of failure. It was faith not in God necessarily, but in the possibility that broken things could be mended, that lost things could be found, that the dead in spirit if not in body could rise again. That night, for the first time since Samuel died, the Yoder family sat together at dinner and laughed. Daniel told a silly story about the chickens. Sarah shared what she'd learned about horse training. Rachel smiled, really smiled, as she passed the potatoes, and Jacob felt a warmth in his chest that he'd thought he'd never feel again. Outside, in the barn, Devil's Shadow stood with his head over his stall door, looking toward the house with its warm lights and sounds of laughter. For the first time in his tortured life, he wasn't plotting escape or revenge. He was just listening. And maybe, just maybe, starting to understand what home meant. The days raced by like water through cupped hands, impossible to hold, slipping away no matter how tightly Jacob tried to grasp them. 12 days. 11. 10. Each sunrise brought them closer to the deadline set by animal control, and each sunset found Jacob lying awake, counting hours instead of sheep. But the progress with Devil's Shadow was undeniable. By day 8, the stallion would let Jacob groom him, standing mostly still while the brush worked through his tangled mane and cleaned the mud from his coat. The scars became visible then, dozens of them telling a story of abuse written in raised tissue and white marks against black hair. By day 9, Jacob could pick up his hooves, checking them for stones and damage. Devil's Shadow would lean his massive weight against Jacob, trusting him to hold steady. By day 10, the horse would follow Jacob around the paddock without a lead rope, his dark eyes always on his human, his ears always forward. Word spread through the Amish community. Families began to stop by, curious to see the miracle, Jacob Yoder and the killer horse that wasn't a killer anymore. They came in buggies, in wagons, on foot. They brought their children to witness something they'd never expected to see. "It's the hand of God," Bishop Eli said, watching Jacob walk the stallion in circles around the paddock. Nothing else could explain it. But Jacob knew better. It wasn't divine intervention. It was something simpler and more profound. Two broken souls recognizing each other and choosing, against all logic, to heal together. Rachel stood beside the bishop, her hand shading her eyes against the November sun. "He's changed," she said softly. "My Jacob. He's come back to us." "Amen," the bishop replied. "Though I wonder what? If the horse has healed the man, or the man has healed the horse, or perhaps they've healed each other." Rachel smiled, and for the first time in 3 years it reached her eyes. "Does it matter? They're both alive again. That's miracle enough." In the paddock, Jacob's hand rested on Devil's Shadow's neck, his voice low and steady as he talked to the horse. From a distance they looked like they'd always belonged together, two dark figures against the pale autumn grass, moving in perfect harmony. Sarah watched from the fence, her journal open in her lap. She'd been documenting everything, every breakthrough, every setback, every moment of progress. She'd already filled Dree's notebooks and had started on a 4th. "Will you let me help today?" Daniel asked for the 100th time, pulling on Jacob's sleeve. "Please, Date. I promise I'll be quiet. I won't scare him again." Jacob looked down at his youngest son, so eager, so desperate to be part of this transformation. For 10 days he'd kept the boy away, afraid that another incident would destroy the fragile trust he'd built with Devil's Shadow. But they only had 3 days left. 3 days to prove to the world that the horse was safe. 3 days to save a life. "All right," Jacob said, and Daniel's face lit up like the sun. But you must do exactly as I say. No sudden movements. No loud noises. Understand? I promise. Daniel bounced on his toes. I promise. I promise. Jacob led his son into the paddock, one hand on Daniel's shoulder, the other holding Devil Shadow's lead rope. The horse's ears immediately went back, his body tensing. Easy, Jacob soothed. It's just Daniel. Remember? He didn't mean to scare you before. He's just a boy who wants to be your friend. Devil Shadow snorted, his eyes fixed on the small human who'd caused such panic before. Daniel stood absolutely still, hardly daring to breathe. His small hand found his father's, gripping it tight. Talk to him, Jacob said softly. Let him hear your voice. Hello, horse, Daniel stammered. My name is Daniel. I'm sorry I scared you before. I didn't mean to. I was just excited to meet you. The stallion's ears flicked forward, then back, then forward again. Listening. You're very beautiful, Daniel continued, his voice growing stronger. The most beautiful horse I've ever seen. And you're brave too. Dat says you're the bravest horse in the whole world. Jacob felt his throat tighten. He'd said that just yesterday when he thought Daniel couldn't hear. I had a brother, Daniel said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. His name was Samuel. He died, and it made everyone so sad. It made my dad forget how to smile. But you made him remember. Devil Shadow took a step toward them. Then another. Jacob held his breath. Will you let me pet you? Daniel asked, extending his small hand with the same careful slowness he'd seen his father use. I'll be very gentle, I promise. The stallion's nose stretched toward Daniel's hand, his nostrils flaring as he sniffed. The boy stood motionless, his hand trembling slightly, but held steady. Devil Shadow's nose touched Daniel's palm. The boy gasped, but didn't pull away. He's so soft, he breathed. Dad, he's so soft. Jacob's vision blurred with tears. Yes, he managed. Yes, he is. For several minutes they stood like that. Father, son, and horse, connected by touch and trust, and something that felt sacred. Then Rachel's voice cut through the moment like a knife. Jacob, come quick. The urgency in her tone made Jacob's blood run cold. He turned to see Rachel running from the house, her apron flying behind her, her prayer cap askew. What is it? What's wrong? Rachel reached the paddock fence, gasping for breath. It's Bishop Eli's grandson, Thomas. He's been in an accident, the hay wagon overturned, and he's trapped. They need every man to help lift it. Where? The Miller farm. Jacob, they say it's bad. His legs are crushed, and they can't get him free. Jacob's heart hammered. Thomas was only 17, a bright boy with his whole life ahead of him. Get Jonas. Tell him to bring tools. I'm coming. He started to hand Devil Shadow's lead rope to Rachel, then paused. The horse couldn't be left loose in the paddock, but the stall seemed wrong somehow, like going backward. Sarah, he called. His daughter jumped up from her spot by the fence. Can you lead him back to the barn? Just walk him to his stall. Can you do that? Sarah's eyes went wide. She'd never handled the horse alone before, but she nodded, her jaw set with determination. Yes, Dad, I can do it. Officers Mitchell and Peters entered the barn, their expressions grave. Behind them came Sheriff Anderson, a man Jacob had known for 20 years. Jacob, the sheriff said, his voice heavy with regret. You know why we're here. He saved a boy's life yesterday, Jacob said. Thomas Beachy would be dead if not for this horse. And then he attacked, Officer Mitchell countered. Multiple witnesses saw him strike Jonas Beachy, saw him go wild. Jacob, we gave you a chance. More than one. But this animal is unpredictable and dangerous. He was frightened. The crowd doesn't matter, Officer Peters interrupted. He had the rifle in his hands now. A horse that panics in a crowd is a danger to the community. You know this, Mr. Yoder. If he'd been in town, at a market during church, he could have killed someone. Jacob stepped in front of Devil Shadow's stall. "You'll have to go through me." "Jacob," Sheriff Anderson said gently, "don't make this harder than it has to be. We have a court order. The horse has been declared a public menace. If you interfere, I'll have to arrest you. Then arrest me." "Dat, no." Jacob turned to see Daniel in the barn doorway, Sarah right behind him, both of them with tears streaming down their faces. "I told you to stay in the house," Rachel said, moving toward them. "We can't let them kill him," Sarah cried. "Please, Dat. Please don't let them." Bishop Eli appeared in the doorway, breathing hard as if he'd run the whole way from his farm. "Wait," he called. "Please wait." "Bishop," Officer Mitchell said with forced patience. "We have our orders." "I know what you have," the old man interrupted. "But I have something too. A petition, signed by every family in this community. Every person who saw what that horse did yesterday. Every soul who understands that he saved my grandson's life." He pulled out a thick sheaf of papers. 87 signatures. 87 people asking you to spare this animal's life, testifying that what happened was not an attack, but a frightened response to a mob. Testifying that Jacob Yoder has done the impossible. He's taken a broken, dangerous creature and shown him love, shown him what it means to be safe. Officer Mitchell took the papers, scanning them with a frown. "This doesn't change the law. The horse is still deemed dangerous." "Then change the law." Daniel's small voice rang out. "If the law is wrong, change it." "Son, it's not that simple." "Yes, it is." Daniel ran forward, placing himself beside his father in front of the stall. "It's exactly that simple. That horse is good. He's kind and brave, and he's my friend. And if you want to kill him, you'll have to kill me too." "Daniel," Rachel started, but Sarah was already moving to stand beside her brother. "Me too. You'll have to go through both of us." Rachel's face crumpled. Then, with a strength Jacob had forgotten she possessed, she walked forward and stood with their children. "Through all of us." Jonas Beachy appeared in the doorway, his arm in a sling from where the horse had struck him. Jacob expected him to demand justice, to insist on the horse's death. Instead, he walked forward and stood beside the Yoder family. "That horse didn't attack me," Jonas said firmly. "I grabbed at him when he was already panicking. It was my fault, not his. If anyone should be held accountable, it's me." "And me," Isaac Miller added, joining the line. "I was part of the crowd that frightened him." "And me," said another voice. And another. And another. One by one, members of the community filed into the barn, creating a human wall between the officers and Devil Shadow's stall. Young and old they came, some who'd doubted, some who'd feared, some who'd called the horse a devil, all of them standing together now. Bishop Eli moved to stand at the center. "You asked for proof that this horse is safe. Here is your proof, not in what the horse has done, but in what he's taught us. He's taught us that the broken can heal, that the feared can be loved, that second chances are not just possible, but necessary." The old man's voice grew stronger. "My grandson lives because of that horse, and I will not stand by while you take his life. None of us will." Officer Mitchell looked at the crowd, at Sheriff Anderson, at his partner. This is highly irregular." "So is everything about this situation," the sheriff said. He looked at Jacob. "I've known you your whole life. Jacob Yoder, you're one of the steadiest men I know. If you say this horse can be trusted, if all these people are willing to vouch for him," he paused, "I think we need to reconsider." "Sir," Officer Peters began. "Lower the rifle, Ryan," Sheriff Anderson ordered. "That's not how we do things here." The young officer reluctantly complied. Officer Mitchell sighed deeply. "I'll need to make some calls. Talk to my supervisor." He looked at the wall of people, at the determination in their faces. "But I'll recommend that the order be suspended pending a full review." "How long?" Jacob asked. "Could be weeks, could be months, and there will be conditions, restrictions on where the horse can go. regular inspections, any incident at all, and we're back here with no discussion. Understood? Jacob nodded, afraid that if he spoke, his voice would break. The officers left, taking their guns and their death sentence with them. The moment they were gone, the barn erupted in cheers and tears and prayers of thanksgiving. Jacob turned to find Devil's Shadow watching the whole scene with his ears pricked forward, his eyes calm. The horse nickered softly as if asking, "Is it over? Am I safe?" "Yes," Jacob whispered, his hand finding the soft nose, the warm breath. "Yes, boy, you're safe. You're home." Daniel ducked under the stall guard and wrapped his arms around the horse's neck. Sarah followed, then Rachel, until the entire family was embracing Devil's Shadow, tears and laughter mixing together. "Thank you," Jacob said to the assembled community. "Thank you for standing with us." Bishop Eli smiled. "You stood for him when no one else would. It was time we returned the favor." He paused, his eyes twinkling. "Besides, that horse has better attendance at our gatherings than half the congregation. Couldn't very well let him go now." Laughter rippled through the barn, releasing the tension that had held them all captive. As the crowd slowly dispersed, each person stopping to touch the horse, to whisper words of thanks or apology or blessing, Jacob felt Rachel's hand slip into his arms. "We did it," she said softly. "We actually did it. We, all of us, our family, our community. We saved him, and in saving him," she looked at their children, at the joy on their faces. "We saved ourselves." Snow blanketed the Yoder farm in pristine white, turning the world into something clean and new. Jacob stood at the paddock fence, watching Devil's Shadow, no longer confined to a stall, play in the snow like a colt. The horse had filled out over the winter months, his coat glossy with health, his eyes bright with contentment. He no longer flinched at sudden movements or cowered from raised voices. He was, quite simply, happy. Daniel rode on his back now, bareback and laughing, the boy's fear of heights conquered by his love for the horse. Sarah had started a riding program for other children in the community, using Devil's Shadow to teach them about trust and patience. And Jacob had learned to live again. The grief over Samuel's loss would never fully disappear. He knew that now, but it had transformed into something bearable, something that no longer consumed every waking moment. He could remember his son with love instead of agony, could speak his name without his chest constricting, could look at Daniel and see Daniel, not Samuel's ghost. Rachel joined him at the fence, slipping her hand into his. They stood together, watching their children play with the horse that had brought them back from the edge of an abyss they'd all been tumbling into. "He has a new name," Rachel said suddenly. "What?" "The horse. The children have been calling him something else. Haven't you noticed?" Jacob thought about it. They had, for weeks now. "What is it?" Rachel smiled. "Hope. They call him Hope." Jacob tested the name, watching the powerful black stallion toss his head, sending snow flying. "Hope," he repeated. "It fits." "Yes," Rachel agreed. "It does." That night, after the children were in bed, after the animals were settled, after the lamps were extinguished, Jacob walked out to the barn one last time. Hope stood in his stall, no longer locked in but choosing to stay. Choosing home. "Thank you," Jacob said, his hand resting on the horse's neck. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for saving all of us." The horse turned his head, his dark eyes reflecting the moonlight streaming through the barn window. In them Jacob saw not the pain and fear that had first drawn him, but peace, contentment, love. "I know I brought you to save you," Jacob continued, his voice thick with emotion. "But the truth is, you saved me. You reminded me that broken things can heal, that love is stronger than pain. That hope, real hope, is always worth fighting for." Hope nickered softly, pressing his nose against Jacob's chest. In that moment, standing in a barn in Ohio, with snow falling gently outside and a horse who'd been condemned to death, now living in peace, Jacob Yoder felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Whole, not perfect, there would always be a Samuel-shaped space in his heart, but whole enough to live, to love, to hope. He left the barn and walked back to the house, where warm light glowed in the windows and his family waited. Rachel had hot chocolate on the stove. The children were reading by lamplight, reluctant to go to sleep. It was ordinary, simple, beautiful. It was home. And somewhere in the barn, a horse named Hope stood watch over them all, a living testament to the truth that the locals had been wrong. He hadn't killed Jacob Yoder. He'd brought him back to life.